I was terrified about just breaking in a new crew and how slow it would be, because I knew we were going to do a higher level of action and more like Hong Kong cinema, which meant I just had to shoot more. I needed more coverage, just needed more takes of everything.
There was the problem with just the fact that there was just absolutely was no overtime down there, which was unusual if you're coming from Hollywood. That it was a surprise a couple of times when just on the dot at 7 o'clock it was over, and if it was going to go 2 minutes over, the crew had to take a vote on it, and that was a big surprise.
And that's it. 7 o'clock. You stop. It's 7 to 7, and I needed more overtime, and so I went to my AD and said, "Look, I really need about another hour to finish the scene." And my AD said, "All right, let me ask the crew when they vote on it." And I said, "They what?" They go, "Oh yeah, the crew votes on your overtime." So I'm watching this whole process as my AD goes to the key members of each department and say, the director would like overtime, they need to shoot the thing, we had a problem, we didn't call the king in, it's partly our fault, and this and that. And so they gave me the hour overtime, but it took 15 minutes to get it, so I actually only got 45 minutes, and I did get the shots. But from then on, I realized this is not like here in the States or up in Canada or another production. You're not going to get any overtime. And so there you have to figure it out. You have to compromise.
Hello, Draco.
Xena, you look good.
So do you.
When we started shooting Xena, it was the little sister. Hercules was shooting on 35mm cameras and had far larger budget than Xena, and Xena was shooting with little 16mm cameras that really at the time not a lot of shows were shooting anymore in 16. And I thought, I don't know, I feel like you're almost stepping backwards to go and shoot to 16. And I got on set and realized this is the perfect way to shoot this show. It's so light and mobile, and we wanted to do neat things where we just put the cameras onto wires and twisted them around, and we wanted to put them on top of the cameraman and send him sailing down on wires. At times we would attach the camera to the stunt double, and so that the feet of like Callisto would go flying down and land on a ladder, and all these things worked out great in 16mm.
I don't think the budget dictated 16 at the time. I think, and I may be mistaken, but I was under the impression that Rob Tapert wanted a grittier type of look than opposed to Hercules, which was pristine 35mm film. And so they purposely went to 16mm in the beginning, which is fine. It's a lighter camera. It's a little easier to load, and and it saves the backs of the crew when they're lugging it around.
The problem with shooting in 16mm was, and one of the reasons we were told not to use special effects is my understanding was there really wasn't any reliable pin-registered 16mm cameras, which meant that you couldn't do background plays. You couldn't do composites. So there were a few shots, I believe, in the pilot episode of Xena where we did composites. I think they mainly dealt with the shock room when it was flying around and bouncing off of things. And I believe that for those few shots we knew had to be composites, we shot those in 35mm with a Mitchell, I think.
Xena actually went in the middle of season 2 to 35mm, and that was done for high resolution purposes.
In fact, it may have been the first year and a half, I think halfway through season 2, the decision was made to go to 35, and normally a DP would jump at the chance because you get the better resolution and the finer grain and more choice of lenses. But we were almost like, well, is this going to make the show something else that it's not? So
I don't think the budget dictated 16. I think it was just actually a look and a style. There's a slight grittiness to 16. We were more handheld on Xena than we would ever be on Hercules, and so we kind of it's easier when the camera's that small, and you're able to kind of move it around a little quicker.
Immortal Father Zeus in heaven, curse this brute if he eats me. Torture him with the slain serpent's blood and the crow's droppings.
Shut up! I hate jetty food.
I know Xena, the warrior princess.
I hate Xena, the warrior princess. She blinded me.
Because of our historical respect for visual effects technology, we often approached certain signature effects in a way that would be representative of even characters, and our Cyclops is a good example of that. We would sit down and design shots that involved what's called a nodal point force perspective.
It was fun to reinvent old techniques. Well, like I said, we did forced perspective, and I think that may have been one of the first times it was done in New Zealand. Peter Jackson ended up using it a lot in Lord of the Rings. But we would set up our forced perspective platforms. And forced perspective is a very old, very simple technique where basically the thing that you want to have bigger, like say the giant, is closer to the camera, and the thing you want smaller is further from the camera, and you cheat the eye lines. And you usually put the foreground element up on a platform to make them look so that their feet are matching up and it looks like they're further back. And then if you have enough light so you can hold your depth of field, it works pretty well.
Guess that job I did on your eye must have cut down on the people eating, huh?
Ever since you blinded me, a day hasn't gone by where I haven't dreamt of tasting your flesh.
We did an in-camera effect in The Reckoning, which took about 2.5 hours to set up. I just sound like a director who's going to complain about how much time everything took. But in this case, again, in the early days, they were learning. They were learning a lot of stuff. And so I remember this one shot in The Reckoning where we went from one set to another, where we dissolved the actors from one set into another in camera. It took 2.5 hours. I thought we were never going to get this shot, and I had about 20 shots that were coming behind it. So that took time, and again, of course, they learned how to do that faster.
There is a shot in Sins of the Past when Xena is first disarming. I think the character's name is Hector. He was Draco's lieutenant at the time. And she takes her sword and she whips it around his, and the camera zips up into a tree. And it zipped up, and I think it was looking at a reflector or something at the end of the shot. And second unit then took that and did a matching pan, whipping up to a tree where the sword was stuck and there it was going doing. And in editing, you cut those two pieces together on the blurred frame and it looks like it's one shot. And those are things that you can do. They're in-camera techniques. They're very effective. We did a lot of that.
I think one of the things I really loved about the challenge of shooting Xena was that through Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert and the whole history of The Evil Dead, they brought a lot of in-camera techniques to the front, which we had never ever really used or considered, and it was amazing to just simple cheesy little things like whiz pans could really enhance battle sequences and fight sequences.
We also did shifted mirror shot, which is the technique that's at least 100 years old. There's a German cinematographer, I believe, named Shifton, who devised it originally, where you set up a mirror at a 45-degree angle and you have a full-size set off in one direction and you have a miniature set off in the other, and you scrape the silver off the back of the mirror so that part of the mirror becomes a window and it's looking through at the full-size set and it's reflecting the image of the miniature set. It was just an early form of a composite. So we did that. We did things like mirror shots. We did glass paintings, a number of those, where we'd actually set up a large plate of glass in front of the camera and we would paint a village or a castle or something on the glass itself and shoot it. And some of those things worked better than others, but it was fun. It was a lot of experimentation.
Sometimes with the effects, in some of the episodes, we decided that we could go low-tech. You could be cheesy if that was right for the episode. And some episodes would have fallen apart if we'd had cheesy effects, so we put more money into them. And there was this incredible balance that Eric Grundemann was able to do, realizing which episodes needed money for effects and which ones you could pull them back and go a little bit cheesy. We often used visual effects to extend the sets, and sort of one of my mottos is that the audience has more imagination than we have set, so don't show them the whole set. Just shoot it tight.
Open the gates! Come on now! Come on, hurry!
You know, Auckland is right in the just about the narrowest part of the country. In fact, there's a part of Auckland where you can walk across the country in about 3 hours. It's about 5 miles wide, the neck of the North Island. And what you've got on either side of that is you've got an ocean. You've got the Pacific on one side, and you've got I don't know if it's the Tasman Sea or whatever it is on the other side, and they're at war with one another all the time. So the weather systems are always at battle. So on any given day, I shot in one day. You could shoot in sun, you could shoot in rain, you could shoot in sun with rain, you could shoot with clouds, without clouds. It made you nuts. So you learned very quickly to get your wide shots as quickly as you could and get into coverage.
The other big challenge was the weather in Auckland around the equinox, the change of seasons. The wind blows constantly and it blows clouds because Auckland is on an isthmus between two major oceans. We attract a lot of clouds, and directors from North America really couldn't believe it when they came down to do their first episode, and the weather would be going cloud, sun, cloud, probably at 10 or 15 second intervals. And I think I'm slowly have lost the sight in my left eye from spending hours and hours and hours looking with a glass at the clouds going in front of the sun.
We do large matte paintings, and there'd be this huge cloud that would roll over during the take that involved the left side of frame. And then all of a sudden we get ready to set up the center part of frame and then there'd be no cloud. Rain was another thing too. A lot of times if you really, really watch those episodes, and this is a testament again to Donnie Duncan and all the DPs that were on the show. It's like they were really smart about trying to photograph around rain.
If you look carefully, in Death in Chains, there's a scene between Gabrielle and the young man that she's interested in that show. I forget his name, but in the coverage, when you've got Gabrielle single, it's nice and bright and shiny, and when you cut to him, it's raining behind him. And we intercut it once or twice. I think we got away with it because it's very tight. But there's that kind of thing all the time, sure. It just used to drive you crazy. And there were times when we would have to sit around and wait for 2-3 hours for the weather to pass.
The rain was a big pain. It's probably one of the biggest drawbacks of shooting down there, because we would be shooting in the stages were not real stages, they were just warehouses. But they were warehouses with tin roofs on top. So you'd be shooting in the middle of a scene and it would just start pouring, and it would just you'd ping, 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 all the way through, and these scenes had to be dubbed over. They had they had to ADR the scene and redo the voice.
That's not so bad, but mud is hard. It's hard to deal with when you're trying to shoot action. When we had to set up the forced perspective platforms for the blind Cyclops sequence, we had a problem because the platforms kept sinking into the mud, and so they would change our eye lines and little things like that you don't anticipate. There was a lot of flu and colds going around, and I got laryngitis during the first episode, and that was an unexpected complication.
Some guys never give up.
The production design team was remarkably skilled at using a lot of the natural materials in New Zealand. They were so familiar with their trees, their river, their topography. They were able to take the materials out of nature and incorporate them and use them in the show. But then they were also incredibly high-tech and able to take foams and make things out of foam and make it look like it was period and that it belonged in this incredible landscape of New Zealand.
The attention to detail, the absolute demand for really high-quality work was a hallmark of these shows.
These guys were incredible. The great thing about Xena, I would read a script, and they would say, okay, we need to build this in Cradle of Hope, we need to build this Pandora's box, which has a hand on it. And I go, okay, fine. Well, they have to build everything. Everything was built from scratch. And you just kind of wonder what these things are going to look like when they get out of the shop.